The door was opened and her old life died in silence. No screaming, no shattered glass, just one woman standing in the hallway watching her future collapse under dim bedroom light. Days later, she walks into a stone villa above the Sicilian Sea where the older brother sits like a king carved from war itself. He barely speaks, he barely moves, but when he looks at her, everything changes. This is not a romance, this is a funeral procession disguised as desire, and every step leads closer to blood.
The betrayal was a spark in a tinderbox, promising a conflagration Ettore could not yet fathom. His transgression was not a simple affair, but a plural offense with two women. Yet this discovery elicited no outburst, no tears, no chaotic destruction. Lena's response was surgical. Her target, his brother, Rella Montalvo, the clan's formidable patriarch. Rella embodied a lethality that deterred all but the suicidal or the desperate. She was a confluence of both. Her strategy was ruthlessly simple: a single night with him, a precise strike against Ettore's blind spot. But Rella's embrace was not that of a pawn, it was the hold of a man claiming a long-awaited prize. His subsequent words revealed a chilling truth. This was no simple act of vengeance against one man. She was entering the gravitational pull of Palermo's most lethal figure. The true horror, however, was the profound desire to repeat the act. This is the Chronicle of Lena, beginning here. Chapter 1. The Revelation. The narrative begins with an omen. The apartment door ajar, a glaring anomaly that signaled imminent peril. Ettore's compulsive need for security was well known. Yet the unlatched door seemed a cosmic invitation to witness his duplicity. She crossed the threshold. The sounds preceded the sight, a soft glow from the bedroom. Then the tableau revealed itself with the force of a silent, visceral blow. He was entangled with two women, oblivious to her presence in the doorway, the keys to their shared life held loosely in her hand. These were the very keys offered as a pledge of singular devotion. For 3 seconds that stretched into an eternity, cognition lagged behind the brutal visual evidence, the sound of another woman's laughter, an alien scent on linens she herself had chosen. And there was Ettore, his handsome features the very lure that had drawn her from her world in Naples to this foreign city. She did not scream. She provided him no ammunition to paint her as hysterical or irrational. Instead, she retreated, turned the handle with practiced silence, and vanished from the apartment as soundlessly as a ghost. The discipline of an orphan's life had instilled a crucial lesson. The most potent grief is that which is weaponized, stored, and released with precision. Descending to her car, parked on a narrow Palermo street beneath a lone amber lamp, she took her place behind the wheel. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, but the engine remained silent. She stared into the void as a familiar constriction seized her chest, and her eyes began to burn. Tears she knew would be an uncontrollable deluge. She suppressed them, ignited the engine, and drove. By night, Palermo possessed an almost artificial splendor. The ancient architecture, the illuminated cathedrals against a dark canvas, the sea air mingling with the city's heat. Over the past 2 years, this place had begun to feel like a home, a transition made for Ettore. But on this night, each street became a phantom limb of a life now severed. This move to Palermo had been his masterstroke. Ettore Montecalvo, the perfect fiancé, charismatic, attractive, scion of a formidable Sicilian dynasty. And she, Hortensia Ferrante, a Neapolitan artisan, raised in austerity while caring for her younger sister, entirely unconcerned with La Cosa Nostra, opulent estates, or men whose family names held more weight than the law itself. A car accident had claimed her parents when she was just 19 years old. Suddenly, she was the sole guardian for Fiammetta, who, at 12, still believed in a just world. Lena never shared this illusion, yet she nurtured it in her sister. She balanced 3 jobs, her skill in jewelry making her only viable source of income. Then Ettore appeared, his charm and persistence backed by a smile that promised sanctuary. She chose to trust this promise. She departed Naples, leaving Fiammetta in the reluctant care of an aunt to forge a new life in Palermo with the man now entangled with strangers in their bed. She pulled over at a viewpoint overlooking the city, a spot typically crowded with tourists capturing daytime images of the port. Under the cloak of night, the overlook was desolate, the sprawling city lights below a meaningless constellation. She drew out her phone, dialing the single individual she could count on at any hour. Fiammetta's sleepy voice answered after the 4th ring. "Ort, it's 2 a.m. Has someone died?" "Ettore was unfaithful," Lena stated, the words delivered with the stark neutrality of a factual report. A 5-second void followed. "Hold on," Fiammetta replied, the sound of her sitting up audible. "With whom?" "2 women. A second, briefer silence ensued. He was with 2 of them. Her sister's voice fractured, not with rage, but with an incredulity that only Fiammetta could weaponize into gallows humor. "He can't even conduct an affair correctly. 1 woman makes him a cliché, 2 just makes him pathetic." A faint smile touched Lena's lips. This was Fiammetta's signature. She could deploy such a line amid chaos, momentarily diminishing the crisis. The power was not in the humor, but in the fierce solidarity it represented. She was not alone. "You must leave that place, return to Naples, catch the earliest train, and come back." "I am not leaving," Lena responded, her gaze locked on the distant harbor lights. "For what reason?" She offered no reply, not from a lack of one, but because the plan was crystallizing, requiring silence to solidify. Fiammetta understood instinctively. Her good night was layered with unspoken sentiment before she disconnected. Lena remained seated, the phone resting on her lap as the Palermo wind filled the car, carrying the scent of the sea and an unfamiliar emotion. It was not grief, nor was it fury. It was a colder, more strategic impulse, a part of her true nature she had long suppressed. That night, Ettore Montecalvo fractured her world, and she resolved to exact a price he could never foresee. Chapter 2. The Brother. For 2 days, she maintained a profound silence. Ettore's call the following morning was a performance of utter normalcy. He discussed lunch, complained of a meeting with their financial advisor, and concluded with a perfunctory, "I love you." His declaration of love felt like a checked box on a to-do list. She affirmed her well-being and reciprocated his sentiment. She ended the call, her stomach in knots but her hands steady. This was not pretense, it was tactics. The vengeance taking root within her was not a creature of impulse and destruction. It was a form of retribution, requiring quiet, precision, and a target that would inflict a wound far deeper than any verbal assault. The target was already selected. The method of approach was still unclear. On the second evening, the unforeseen opportunity presented itself. The traditional family dinner at Villa Montecalvo. Monthly, the matriarch convened her sons, the syndicate's chief operators, and all others requiring a reinforcement of the hierarchy. As Ettore's fiancé, her presence was not optional. She chose a high-collared black dress, styled her hair up, and applied a dark shade of lipstick. Her reflection in the mirror offered a stark realization. For the first time in 2 years, her attire was not for admiration. It was armor for a battle. The Villa Montecalvo commanded a hill at Palermo's edge, overlooking both sea and city. It was an old estate, defined by massive stone ramparts, secluded gardens, and a groaning iron gate that signaled entry into a different domain. Ettore's vehicle crunched up the gravel drive, halting as two sentinels silently opened their doors. She emerged, and he placed a hand on her waist with the proprietary ease of a man who equated an engagement ring with ownership. The dining hall was cavernous, dominated by a dark wood table that could seat 15 people, its surface shadowed by a wrought iron chandelier. Upon their entrance, most places were occupied. Attendants moved discreetly, filling glasses marked with the family crest. Presiding at the table's head was Donna Lucaya Montecalvo, the family's 58-year-old matriarch. Her silver hair was coiled tightly, gold chains adorned her neck, and her bearing radiated absolute authority. As mother to Ettore and Rila, she governed the family's domestic sphere with an iron will her sons knew better than to challenge. Her acknowledgment of Lena was a smileless nod, the most civil gesture she had ever offered. In Donna Lucaya's eyes, Lena remained the nameless girl from Naples, an interloper at her sacred table. Here, the pieces are set on the board. Hortensia takes her seat beside Ettore, who is already engrossed in a discussion of port logistics with the captain. Opposite them is Saro Ferrante, the family consigliere, sharing a surname by coincidence, his weary gaze surveying the room. At 60, Saro is bald, exuding a detached civility toward all. Stationed against a nearby wall is Bastiano, Rella's chief enforcer, a man of formidable presence. In his early 30s and powerfully built, his stillness is ambiguous, somewhere between ennui and predatory patience. Bastiano has been Rella's shadow since childhood, their bond forged beyond the need for formal allegiance. At the precise moment before dessert is presented, the family ritual is broken. Ettore fields a call at the table. A silent, seething judgment passes over Donna Lucrezia's face, her lips compressing into a bloodless line. Yet he remains entirely oblivious. The call lasts less than a minute, but I am positioned to overhear two words that telegraph disaster at dinner: transfer and postponed. Once he disconnects, Saro observes him over his spectacles, his tone as neutral as a weather report. An issue with the port ledgers, Ettore. Ettore offers a polished smile, a practiced reflex for deflecting concern. Nothing a skilled accountant cannot resolve, Saro counters. The man resumes sipping his wine, a picture of calm. However, for a fraction of a second, I observed his knuckles bleach against the glass stem. Meanwhile, Bastiano, affecting complete disinterest, lowers his arms, directing a glance at Rella that I would only decipher much later. It is the look of a man privy to the entire sordid truth, awaiting the cue to detonate it. My gaze then finds him at the head of the table, Rella Montecalvo. I had noticed Rella at prior dinners, brief appearances to collect Ettore, but I had never truly perceived him, never registered the immense burden he carried. A spine of forged steel, his hands resting on the table as if to hold the very world in place. Rella has commanded the Montecalvo family since his father, Don Salvatore, passed 6 years ago. He seized power at 26, governing with minimal words and an absolute intolerance for failure. He lacked Ettore's cinematic good looks, the chiseled jaw, the pale eyes, the disarming smile. Rella's features commanded deference in rooms filled with armed men. His face was a map of hard lines, a resolute jaw, and dark eyes that absorbed every surrounding detail. But this evening was an anomaly. this evening, his focus found and held mine. It happened during dessert as Donna Lucrezia detailed renovations for the East Wing and the Capos grumbled about the expense. Ettore chuckled at a joke, and while I idly swirled my untouched wine, I became aware of an intense gaze pressing down on me. My head lifted, my eyes locking with Rella's across the table. His concentration was so potent it felt as if it had physically stolen my breath. The stare persisted for 2, perhaps 3 seconds longer than convention allows. He then broke contact, feigning that nothing had occurred. But something had. A chilling realization settled over me. That look was not an introduction. Rella Montecalvo had been observing me like this before, at other dinners, in other corridors. In moments I was too consumed with playing Ettore's fiancé to notice his brother's eyes on me from the periphery. During dinner, Donna Lucrezia addresses me, her voice engineered to sound casual but laced with condescension. Hortensia, my dear, how is your little jewelry hobby progressing? Ettore adds, you have been crafting some beautiful things. It is so good to have a pastime. The word hobby lands like a physical blow. 2 years of my life, a gallery exhibition in Palermo, and 3 international commissions. To them, a hobby. I was poised to respond, but Ettore spoke first. Mother, Hortensia has talent. Her work is selling quite well. He delivered the line with the same hollow enthusiasm he might use to discuss the forecast, devoid of genuine pride, merely occupying silence. I offered a smile and a thank you, washing down my retort with a sip of wine. After the meal, the men withdrew to the study, the women to the sitting room. Feeling drawn to neither, I slipped into the corridor that joins the dining area to the gardens. The hallway was cavernous, walled with stone, and adorned with portraits of ancestors in ostentatious gold frames. The air was chilled, and the silence was a tangible presence, dense and oppressive. It was there that I encountered Rella. He was emerging from the study, completely unaccompanied. No Bastiano, no Saro, none of his usual retinue. He saw me and simply halted. He made no move to step aside, to continue past, or even offer a perfunctory nod. He just stopped, fixed his eyes on me, and remained there. The corridor was wide enough for 2, but we were both occupying its center. Suddenly, the distance between us felt critically insufficient. You are not in the sitting room with the others, he observed. His voice was deeper, more resonant than I had ever realized. It was not a query, it was a declaration, the sort of opening gambit used by a man accustomed to absolute authority instead of pleasantries. I am not like the others, I replied, the words escaping me. The rejoinder was out before I could censor it, and for a moment I feared I had miscalculated. Yet Rella showed no reaction. A corner of his mouth ticked upward, perhaps half a centimeter. It was a micro-expression so faint it could be missed in a blink. And in that subtle motion, I detected something utterly unexpected from a man like him. Surprise, as if he had anticipated deference and received a challenge instead. Interesting was his only comment. He walked by me, but his scent remained for about 5 seconds after his departure. It was woody and stark, not designed to be pleasing. It was a scent that simply was, because the man simply was, not an affectation chosen from a shelf. I stood there, my heart pounding, as a concept crystallized in my mind with the perfect click of a necklace clasp. Rella Montecalvo, Ettore's elder brother, the Don, a man universally feared and never defied, had just offered me a fleeting smile in a vacant hallway with no witnesses. I was quiet on the drive home. He opened my door, kissed my forehead, and remarked that dinner was pleasant. I concurred, my gaze fixed on the rearview mirror as Veli Montecalvo dissolved into the night. Rella Montecalvo represented the ideal retribution, the single blow Ettore would be entirely unprepared for. The unnerving part was not the plan, but the startling ease with which it formed, as though the notion had been dormant within me, awaiting a catalyst. Chapter 3: Countering Fire with Fire. 1 week following that dinner, I understood Rella Montecalvo's routine better than my own. It was not difficult. Ettore was a constant source of complaint about his brother. He lamented his hours, his meetings, the strategic decisions Rella made unilaterally. "He's having dinner at Ferraro's again," Ettore would grumble, as if the establishment were beneath the dawn. "He allocates more time there than at the villa." I gathered each piece of information like an uncut gem, anticipating the moment to shape it into a weapon. Ristorante Ferraro was located on a narrow street near Palermo's old quarter, the kind inhospitable to cars but perpetually hosting a black sedan with tinted glass. Externally, the establishment was deliberately inconspicuous. A wooden door, a small engraved plaque, no neon signs, no queue. Inside, dark wood tables, low lighting, and a hush that suggested the conversations held more value than the cuisine. I arrived on a Tuesday evening, alone, having told Ettore I was meeting a gallery associate. He did not even inquire about a name. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a glass of red wine, and monitored the entrance with an air of infinite patience. Rella arrived at 9:15. I spotted him first. The door swung open and he entered, Bastiano positioned 2 paces behind him. True to form, their arrival palpably altered the room's atmosphere. The manager's posture straightened. A waiter materialized with a menu, and 2 men near the entrance instinctively corrected their stance. Rella wore a dark suit, no tie, his collar unbuttoned. He moved with the assurance of a man who knew no one in that room would rise without his permission. His eyes found mine at the bar, and instead of proceeding to his reserved table, he murmured something to Bastiano. Bastiano's gaze shifted from me to Rella, then he continued toward the table without speaking. Rella approached the bar, claiming the stool beside me. He maintained a small distance between us, too deliberate to be incidental, too great to be in advance. "You again," he said, his focus elsewhere. He gestured to the bartender who produced a whiskey without needing to be asked. The man was already known here. "Me again," I answered, swirling the wine in my glass. "Alone. It would seem so." He took a drink of whiskey, his gaze on the bottles lining the back bar, as if deciphering some hidden script. Then his head pivoted, and he leveled a look at me that was out of place in a casual setting. It was probing and relentless, as if he were excavating for a truth I had buried. "My brother's fiancé," he stated, "is seldom seen in establishments not of her own choosing." It was neither an accusation nor idle chat. It was a challenge. "Perhaps the list of establishments has been revised," I countered, meeting his stare. A minute twitch at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, signaled my volley had found its mark. He finished his whiskey in one motion, set the glass on the bar, and stood. "Good night, Hortensia." He pronounced my name as if each syllable were a weighted object. He crossed to his table in the shadows where Bastiano stood waiting, arms folded, his expression one I would only come to understand much later. It was the look of a man who has witnessed something he was not meant to see and has chosen silence. As Rella took his seat, Bastiano unfolded his arms, his eyes darting to the bar, to me, and then back to Rella. Without looking up from the menu, Rella spoke. "Sit down, Bastiano." For 2 seconds, Bastiano remained standing, as if contemplating, his response before replying, "I believe I will stand. The view is superior from here." Rella did not answer, but I saw it from across the room. That flicker on his lips once more, this time nearly forming into an actual smile. And so, 4 days later, the second act begins, and this time, she is not the architect of the encounter. She's at a small gallery opening in Palermo, observing 3 pieces of her own creation. The door chimes, and Rela Montecalvo enters, composed as if he holds the deed to the entire city block. No bodyguards, no entourage, just him. He is wearing a dark shirt, sleeves rolled, and the very atmosphere in the room seems to densify, just as it did at their first meeting. The atmosphere grows palpably tense, and she attempts to project an air of composure, remarking, "I didn't expect to see you here." Even as her pulse quickens, he pauses at her exhibit. "I found the invitation at home," he states. "Edie left it. I figured the collection was worth seeing." The subtext is clear. His presence is for the art, not her, a subtle power play she instantly comprehends. But then his gaze shifts to a genuine, focused examination of her work. His attention narrows to a silver bracelet adorned with red coral, a piece she personally favors. He then offers an observation that shatters her assumptions. The coral is not merely decorative, it is integral to the structure. She is visibly stunned. No one, not even seasoned art critics, had grasped this detail. Yet here was this crime lord, the city's de facto ruler, articulating the core truth of her own design back to her. She can only respond with, "You have an eye for jewelry." "I recognize things created with intent," he counters, as they both lean over the display, their proximity creating a charged space. He reaches for the piece, and his fingers make fleeting contact with hers. For what feels like 3 seconds, the moment is suspended. Neither recoils. The electric tension lingers until he finally lifts the bracelet, inspects it, and sets it down again, deliberately ignoring the current that just passed between them. "Good work, Hortensia," is his only comment before he turns and departs without a backward glance. She is left reeling from the contact, realizing her grand design for revenge is becoming dangerously complex. Their third encounter proves to be the turning point. It unfolds late one night in the villa's garden, following another strained family dinner. She had retreated there to escape the theatrics of Donna Lucrezia. The garden is a secluded, walled space, fragrant with orange trees and centered by a stone bench. And occupying that bench, lost in contemplation, is Rel himself. He shows no surprise at her entrance. He simply inclines his head as if her arrival was an expected event. "Escaping the festivities?" she inquires, approaching him with deliberate slowness. "Escaping my mother," he corrects, "which is functionally the same in this house." A genuine laugh escapes her. She takes a seat beside him, positioning herself much closer than before in a calculated move. For a moment, they share a comfortable silence. He then asks, "Do you like it here?" "Palermo, this life." The question, though simple on its surface, is deeply layered. Certain aspects of it, she concedes. "But I feel diminished here. In Naples, I had an identity. Here, I am merely the newcomer." He grows still, as if her words have struck a resonant chord within him. He then shares a piece of his own history. "I assumed control of the family at 26, he reveals. "My father passed, and the following day, I faced 30 men awaiting my command. No one inquired if I was prepared. They were simply waiting." In that admission, she perceives the man behind the formidable reputation. Not the capo, but a solitary figure burdened with a world he never chose. Do you ever miss it? She asks gently. The time before all this. After a long pause, he whispers, I no longer remember who I was. The confession resonates deeply with her, for she understands it completely. She, too, cannot recall her identity before the loss of her parents and the responsibility of raising Fiamma. In that shared vulnerability, the strategic game between them dissolves. This is no longer about retribution. It is immediate and raw. He turns toward her, closing the last of the space between them. She can feel the heat from his body, his scent, and hear the controlled cadence of his breath. He begins to lean in, a slow, conscious movement from a man fully aware he is about to transgress a boundary. You are engaged in a perilous game, Hortensia, he murmurs, his breath warm against her skin. Perhaps, she whispers in return, her gaze unwavering. But I am not the one forfeiting control. The challenge is cast. His eyes flick to her lips, then back to her eyes, revealing an internal war. But then, Rel withdraws. He understands that crossing this line, with his family 30 meters away, would incinerate everything. He rises, straightens his collar, and offers a quiet, good night. Then he is gone. She remains on the bench, her heart pounding, desperately trying to reassert the fiction that this is still her revenge, and that she is still its master. The next morning, she recounts a condensed version to her friend Fameda. Let me understand this, Fameda says. You have pivoted from the unfaithful brother to the Mafia Don brother. Oh, Hortensia, that is not a strategy, she states flatly. That is a prestige television drama. For the first time in a very long time, Hortensia laughs, and the unfamiliar sound of it unnerves her. Later, she attempts to work, sketching a silver ring. But the lines on the page refuse to form correctly. She erases and redraws repeatedly until she realizes she isn't sketching jewelry. She is tracing the sharp angle of his jawline, the profile of a face she has no right to remember with such clarity. The pencil falls from her hand. She stares at the paper, her heart hammering against her ribs, questioning the entire premise of her mission. The objective was supposed to be simple: get close to Rel, ensure Etre discovered it, and inflict suffering. She was not meant to find pleasure in the deception. He was not supposed to become a permanent fixture in her consciousness. She was certainly not supposed to be replaying his words. I recognize things created with intent, as if he were speaking not of her art but of her. She was absolutely not supposed to feel his touch every time she glanced at the coral. And yet this is her reality. He occupies her every thought. She relives it all. She feels everything. So when he calls that night, discussing a 2-day business trip to Catania, a meeting with a supplier, his voice is what it always is. Blithely unaware, the sound of a man with no inkling that his entire world is on the verge of collapse. She waits for the familiar surge of rage, the sting of betrayal that has fueled her entire existence. She braces for it, but what comes is a cold emptiness, something far worse than anger, profound indifference. Etre Montecalvo is speaking, and she feels absolutely nothing. Not fury, not pain, not the drive for retribution. He had become mere background noise, like a television left on in an unoccupied room, and if he was only static, then so was her grand scheme for vengeance. Revenge requires an emotional fuel, and her fire had been extinguished, supplanted by the force captured in that sketch. It lived in the phantom warmth on her skin and in the memory of a quiet garden where a man bearing an impossible weight admitted he had lost his way. She crumpled the drawing of Rel's jaw, threw it away, and repeated the lie. It is still about revenge. She is in control. The plan remains intact. It was a falsehood she was too terrified to confront. Meanwhile, across town, Etre was beginning to perceive that something was deeply amiss. A text message that was too curt, a look in her eyes he could not decipher, the way she would guard her phone whenever he entered the room. He had not yet assembled the puzzle, but he was observing her, and she knew her time was dwindling. Chapter 4. The Night of the Unraveling. 2 weeks after their initial meeting, she made the irreversible call. This was no impulsive act. For 14 consecutive days, a war had raged within her mind, logic versus emotion. Her rational side insisted, Rollo Monte Calvo is a weapon, not the end goal. But her heart whispered a completely different narrative, and that whisper was destroying her sleep, forcing her to recall his touch at the gallery when she should have been architecting his family's ruin. It had her conjuring his scent in the garden as she lay in her own bed. She tried to dismiss it as adrenaline, the thrill of proximity to danger, the intoxicating success of her own machinations. She promised herself that once the revenge was complete, these feelings would simply vanish. But on the night she started her car and drove to the Villa Monte Calvo without informing anyone, she knew the time for self-deception was over. She arrived at the estate around 11 p.m. The main gates were secured, but a single light shone from an upstairs window, Rel's study, his nocturnal sanctuary. She parked down the road, exited her vehicle, and walked directly to the guard at the side entrance. He recognized her, the fiancé, and offered the blend of confusion and deference the staff reserved for anyone with the Monte Calvo name. "I must speak with Rel," she informed him, using his first name intentionally. "Not Mr. Monte Calvo, not the boss." The guard registered the shift in dynamic instantly, but was wise enough not to comment. He spoke quietly into his radio, received clearance, and swung the gate open without another word. The villa possesses a different aura at night. The corridors, typically alive with activity, were silent and shadowed, punctuated by isolated pools of light on the floor. With each echoing footstep, she felt herself advancing toward a point of no return. Rel's study was located at the end of the hall on the second floor, behind a heavy wooden door she had never passed through. Upon reaching it, she found the door slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the hallway. She pushed it open and entered. He was seated at his desk, in a dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by documents. The room was a perfect extension of his persona. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookcases, a well-worn leather chair, and the persistent aroma of wood and coffee. The window was open to the night, admitting a breeze carrying the scent of the sea and the nearby orange groves. As I entered, Rel's gaze met mine, stretching the silence into a tactical pause. He observed me with a familiar, dissecting scrutiny, a man gathering intelligence before committing to a maneuver. I remained motionless in a simple dark dress, hair unbound, the frantic pulse in my chest a drumbeat I felt certain he could perceive. "Hortensia," he articulated, and the sound of my name, at 11 post meridium in his private study, punctuated by the click of the closing door, carried a new resonance. It was a subtle demarcation of territory. "I required a word with you," I ventured, advancing a single step. The desk between us was a formidable object, yet it felt like an irrelevant boundary. "At this late hour," he noted, the words a flat statement, not an inquiry. He circumnavigated the desk with a slow, deliberate motion, less like a man walking and more like a predator adjusting its position for the hunt. Each step he took seemed to diminish the available oxygen in the room, the ambient temperature rising with his proximity. When he ceased moving, he stood less than a foot from me, forcing an upward tilt of my head to meet his eyes. In this setting, devoid of the garden, the crowd, the pretense of a chance meeting, his very presence assumed a different gravity. It felt more potent, exponentially more perilous. "You did not seek me out," he stated, his voice a low, steady current with an undertow I had not previously detected. "You are here because of him." The statement was a shock of cold clarity, not for its falsehood, but for its unvarnished, absolute truth, the very premise upon which my night had been built. I had come seeking an instrument for my retribution. I was here to transform Rel into the very weapon that would bring about Etra's ruin. And he perceived it all. His awareness had been a constant, silent observer. I parted my lips to offer a rebuttal, any phrase to maintain the fiction of my control, but Rel afforded me no such opportunity. "It is of no consequence to me," he declared, and then his lips were on mine. The kiss preempted the processing of his words. This was no gentle exploration. It was an act of precision, its force perfectly calibrated, its pressure assertive, as if he had rehearsed this precise scenario 1,000 times in his mind. His hands framed my face with a strength that was not painful, merely absolute. I could feel the warmth from his palms, taste the whiskey on his breath, and register the familiar scent of wood smoke, but at this range, it was something more elemental. It was a heat, a weight, that was entirely and singularly his. This was the moment for retreat. I should have pushed him away, readjusted my dress, and delivered a sharp remark about the imprudence of this action. Yet his kiss left no space for cognitive function. My body initiated a response long before my mind could formulate a veto. Without conscious thought, my hands found his shirt, registering the texture of the fabric and the solid muscle beneath. As his fingers traced a path from my face to my throat, and then to the hollow of my collarbone, with a deliberateness that arrested my breath. The subsequent events were never a component of my strategy. Nothing about that evening was. Rel was a man who engaged the world with a blade's edge. I understood this. He commanded men with a single word, resolved conflicts with a look, and confronted his enemies with a coldness more lethal than any projectile. But here, isolated in his study as the villa slept, he was a different entity. Every touch was measured and exact, as though he had anticipated this moment indefinitely and refused to squander a single second of it. His hands moved across my form with a reverence I had never received from men who were handsome, charming, and perpetually eloquent. With him, physical contact had been a transaction, another item on an agenda. Rella was not hurrying. He held my gaze after each advance, seeking nonverbal consent, offering me every chance to withdraw while projecting the certainty that I would not. His fingers eased the strap of my dress from my shoulder with a slowness that was almost torturous. As the silk glided down my skin, inch by agonizing inch, I observed the clenching of his jaw, a minute signal of the immense self-control this was costing him. At some juncture, my back met the cool wood of his desk, a stark contrast to the heat emanating from his body. The sensation elicited a gasp, and he paused, not at my request, but to register the sound, to confirm its nature. His eyes, dark and intensely focused, locked with mine. and within their depths I perceived something more unsettling than any physical touch. This was not a casual act of seduction. This was a fundamental necessity, a primal need. I pulled at his shirt. The buttons yielded, the fabric parted. The instant my hands made contact with his skin, warm, taut, and mapped with the scars of untold histories, his respiration altered. It became shallower, yet deeper. It was the first fissure in the legendary composure of Rella Montecalvo. He lifted me by the waist, placing me upon the edge of the desk with an ease that left me breathless. He positioned himself between my legs, his hands gripping my hips, and pressed his forehead against mine. We remained in that position for a beat that stretched into an eternity, sharing the same supercharged atmosphere, poised at the threshold of the irrevocable. As the last of our clothing was discarded, his expression was not merely one of lust, but of pure intention, the look of a man in absolute command who wanted me to comprehend it. He entered me with a slow, deliberate push. The sensation caused me to arch my back and dig my nails into his shoulders. He held himself perfectly still for a moment, his breath catching, his eyes fixed on mine, and in that instant she perceived it, a vulnerability in his armor. The man was giving as much as he was taking. The rhythm he established was an exercise in power, slow, deep, withdrawing to the very brink before plunging back in. He monitored her every reaction, his hands on her hips like anchors. The desk began to creak, a percussive score to their ragged breathing, and her name, whispered so low against her neck she almost missed it. The pressure built and then it detonated. He accelerated without sacrificing an inch of depth, and her entire world contracted to become him. She broke first, the wave crashed over her, and she could only cling to him as her body convulsed. Rella reached his own limit a second later, his entire frame tensing in one final powerful thrust. A raw sound escaped him against her neck, one he made no attempt to suppress. For the first time that night, his perfect control was utterly shattered. When it was over, the silence that descended upon the room was heavier than any she had ever experienced. They remained in that study for an indeterminate period. He was leaned against the desk, his shirt in disarray, his hair tousled. She stood by the window, hands trembling as she smoothed her dress, the air thick with the scent of the night, the sea, and something far more intimate. Rella was the one to break the silence. "This was not a component of your strategy," he said, his gaze averted. His voice was rougher now, with an edge she could not place. It was not cold, nor was it controlled. It was simply, brutally honest. And indeed, it had not been part of her plans either. She offered no reply, for what could she possibly say? He was entirely correct. She had come to this villa to pit the older brother against the younger. What had just transpired in that study was a radical deviation from the script. The fire, the intensity, the way he felt against her like a missing counterpart. That was not about revenge. It was something that frightened her far more than the betrayal that had brought her there. She fled the villa before sunrise. The massive iron gate groaned open, the sound echoing across the hill like a warning issued too late. She settled into her car, placed her hands on the steering wheel, and stared into the darkness, attempting to process the recent cataclysm. She drew out her phone and sent a text to Fia. "I have to talk to you." A response materialized in under 30 seconds. Despite the hour being nearly 3 a.m, "If you are confessing to a homicide, I am on the first train to Palermo. If not, it can wait for daylight. I have an 8 o'clock examination." A faint smile touched her lips. She dropped the phone, ignited the engine, and descended the hill with Palermo illuminated below like a cartography of all she had just irrevocably damaged. What she could not possibly have known was that another person in the villa was already awake, and that in 3 days the House of Monte Calvo was about to learn everything. Chapter 5. Blood and Silence. 3 days. That was the interval required for her entire world to detonate. For 3 days, she existed on a razor's edge. She woke beside Etra, shared coffee with him, and responded to his texts as if nothing had changed, all while the truth of her actions clawed at her from within. Her body remembered what her voice could not articulate. Her hands could still feel the texture of Rella's shirt. Her skin recalled his heat, his weight, the commingled scent of wood and ocean that clung to her for hours after she had escaped the villa. She did not contact Rella. He did not contact her. And the silence between them, which ought to have been a relief, was instead a heavy, churning dread in her gut that she could not dispel. On the 3rd day, Donna Lucrezia hosted a family luncheon at the villa. It was an informal affair, the table set on the terrace overlooking the gardens, with a crisp white tablecloth under the oppressive Palermo sun. She arrived as she always did, on E.T.'s arm, wearing the appropriate dress and a manufactured smile. Bastiano was already at his station by the rear entrance, arms folded. Sardo, the family's counsel, was relaxed in a chair, occupied with his phone. Donna Lucrezia was orchestrating the staff with the precision of a 4-star general. Rella had not yet appeared, and she despised herself for instinctively surveying the grounds for him upon her arrival. The meal commenced in his absence. Ettore was in high spirits, laughing loudly and refilling his wine glass with the dedication of a man on a mission. Donna Lucrezia offered sharp critiques of the cuisine, the new renovations, and the excessive heat. Everything felt routine. Everything felt secure. Rella arrived just as the second course was being served. He emerged from the garden, not the house, clad in his customary dark attire and wearing the classic expression of a man shouldering the weight of the world. He claimed the empty seat at the far end of the table, offered his mother a brief nod, and then proceeded to deliberately and completely ignore her presence. The carefully constructed atmosphere of the terrace shattered upon his arrival. It was not his actions, but her own draining performance of ignorance against the truth between them that frayed the social fabric. In that tension, Etra's rise was less a movement and more a detonation. He did not rise slowly. He erupted from his seat into the stance of an accuser, glass in hand. His eyes burned, not with wine, but with a pristine and focused rage. His question: "Would anyone care to tell me what the hell is going on?" was an indictment that targeted her and Rella. The voice, a razor's edge, severed the murmur of conversation, imposing a stark, chilling silence. Donna Lucrezia became a portrait of suspended time, her fork frozen in the air. Sardo's phone descended. Bastiano's arms unlaced. Every gaze pivoted in a synchronized, morbid ballet from Eder to her, then to Rella, observing a disaster unfold in slow motion. "Eder," Donna Lucrezia began, her matriarchal tone attempting to quell the inferno. "No, Mother." He severed her attempt, his focus an unbreakable line to the girl. "She knows exactly what I'm talking about, and so does he." She anchored herself to the wine glass with both hands, not for a drink, but for stability. While her heart hammered, her hands were unnervingly still. For 3 days she had rehearsed this confrontation, yet no mental preparation could steel her for the weight of every Monte Calvo stare, a tribunal of eyes that felt like a firing squad. You, he seethed, the glass aimed at her like a weapon, its contents churning perilously. You were with my brother. The words detonated in the stillness. A fork clattered from Donna Lucizia's hand onto her plate. A single eyebrow on Sardo's stoic face arched, the first visible fissure in his impenetrable composure. The staff, masters of strategic invisibility, simply vanished. Her gaze met Edo's, the same eyes that had once promised a future she had built for a man entirely unworthy of it. Then, with a composure that stunned them both, she retaliated. The instant I opened that door, you annihilated everything. Do not dare hold me responsible for forging my own escape. A vacuum of 2 seconds followed. In that space, his fury collapsed into shock, then curdled into a bitter humiliation. Her statement was not a defense, but a counter-offensive, broadcasting his infidelity to the entire family. He began to snarl, but Rahl was already rising. There was no theatricality, only the severe scrape of his chair against the stone, a sound that surgically excised Edo's words. Rahl's mere presence rendered shouting futile. His posture, the rigid line of his shoulders, and his cold, unwavering gaze transformed the silence into a palpable weapon. Sit down, Rahl commanded his brother, the 2 words laden with unspoken consequences. Edo remained standing, but the insult withered on his tongue. He was paralyzed, his glass trembling, his face aflame, directing a look of pure fraternal hatred at Rahl. At that moment, Donna Lucizia rose, setting her napkin down with a chilling deliberation. Ralello, to the study, now! This was not a suggestion. It was the matriarch asserting ultimate authority. Rahl's gaze flicked from her to me, and in that fleeting connection, an entire message was conveyed. The concern, the controlled fury, and a silent appeal for her to maintain her composure. He moved inside, obedient to his mother. Edo lingered on the terrace, simmering, his hand crushing his wine glass. Bastiano then glided into the space between them, a human shield whose purpose was implicitly understood. She rose from her seat and escaped through a side door into the hall. She needed air, an exit from the crossfire of judgment and whispers. Finding cool surface, she pressed her back against the wall, shut her eyes, and drew one long, shuddering breath. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps and a low-pitched discussion down the corridor. Near the stairs, Sardo and Bastiano kept their voices muted. She remained perfectly immobile, her eyes closed, absorbing the auditory data. The figures on the last shipment are low, Sardo noted, his tone as nonchalant for conspiracy as it was for commerce. It's the same pattern we've observed for months. He's been skimming from a minimum of 3 operations I'm aware of, likely more. A 2-second pause from Bastiano, then, softer. Is Rahl aware? Rahl is aware of everything, Sardo confirmed. He is merely choosing his moment. Their footsteps receded. She stayed against the wall, this new information locking into place within a larger, more sinister design she was only beginning to comprehend. So there I was, pressed to a wall in Villa Monte Calvo, under the glare of the sun, through the arches. When her voice reached me, it was Donna Lucizia, the matriarch, and her words cut cleanly through the study door. You will remove that woman, or I will convene a family council, she stated icily. And we are both aware of how that vote will conclude. Rahl offered no reply, or was too quiet to be heard. Then, movement. A door opened and shut. Absolute silence. I was about to retreat when Donna Lucizia emerged and our eyes met. instantly caught. She saw me before I could fabricate a reason for being there. Her expression communicated everything. She knew I had been listening, and more tellingly, she was indifferent. Perhaps my overhearing this was intended. She paused a few feet from me, and at this proximity, the truths hidden at dinner became visible. The fine network of lines around her eyes, the vulnerability of her skin against the cold gold of her chain, the deep weariness from upholding a dynasty that never properly valued her. "Do you imagine you are the first?" she inquired, her voice steeped in history rather than animosity. I was her. Salvatore brought me to this place at 23, and his mother fixed me with the same lethal glare I am giving you now. In time, she passed, and I assumed her position. That is the mechanism of this house. The women who endure inherit the fortress, but they are never granted the power. I held her gaze without wavering and replied, "Then it seems the rules of the house require revision." For 3 full seconds, Donna Lutzizia simply watched me, and in that brief interval I registered a flicker of something in her expression. Not consensus, but recognition. As if she perceived I was not another placeholder. I was a variable poised to disrupt the entire game. She gave no verbal response, only adjusted her necklace and continued on her way without a backward glance. Yet her gait was not quite as composed as before. I was certain our exchange had unsettled her. For the following 2 days, Raoul became a ghost. He was physically present, in the villa, in meetings with Bastiano and Sardo managing the port. But to me, he was an absence, no glances, no messages, not one syllable. Our night in the study now felt like a delirious memory. I was once again an insignificant player in the Monte Calvo drama. Eto had vanished the next morning and remained absent. He had retreated to his city apartment, from which he launched furious texts I did not read and calls I allowed to go unanswered. He was no longer my concern. Raoul was. Or so I reasoned, attempting to understand the hollow space expanding with each silent hour. On the evening of the second day, I phoned Fiammetta. She answered immediately, as if awaiting my call. I began to recount the events on the terrace, Donna Lucizia's ultimatum, but Fiammetta interrupted me. There was no humor, no guidance, only raw fear. "Stop," she pleaded. "Aurore, just stop. You are terrifying me." I fell silent. "I am serious," she insisted, and I heard the sound of her rising and beginning to pace. "You are enmeshed with a Mafia family while I am in Naples preparing for an art final as if the world is normal. What am I meant to do? How do I even help? I don't know how." Her voice fractured on the final word, a pain sharper than any insult from Ito or his mother. Fiammetta was the one I had always shielded. Now she was desperate to protect me, and we were both utterly adrift. "You can help by remaining precisely where you are," I said, forcing a tone of conviction, "and by having faith in me." 5 seconds of stillness. Then, more gently, she said, "I do. But if they harm you, I will travel to Palermo, and I will reduce that villa to ashes. I promise you." A smile almost formed, but it ached, because for the first time, this was no longer about survival. I wanted him. The realization struck with physical force, because this was no longer about retribution or calculated moves. This was visceral, the kind of wanting that one night cannot resolve, the kind that defies any strategy. I wanted Raoul Montealvo. I wanted the monster, the quiet anguish in every one of his fractured parts. And his choice to prioritize the family over me inflicted a wound far deeper than any of Edo's deceptions. The next morning, a text from Bastiano appeared. It was brutally concise. Meeting, main hall tonight. Then came the sentence that altered the equation. He requests your presence. I read it 3 times. Requests, not commands, not summons. He asked. Raul Montecalvo was asking. And that single word carried more weight than any kiss. I had no conception of his intentions. Was I to be chosen or discarded? Was he planning to defend our connection or offer me as a sacrifice to his clan? Yet one thing was certain. He required me to witness the outcome, regardless of its conclusion. And I had no intention of being absent. Chapter 6. What Remains. The main hall of Villa Montecalvo seemed expressly designed for confrontations of this magnitude. Soaring ceilings, stone walls, and a grand table flanked by chairs that resembled thrones. This was the chamber where the old Don forged his empire, and where Raul assumed control. That night the lighting was dim, the shutters were sealed, and the atmosphere was heavy enough to suffocate. Upon my entrance, the entire assembly was already in place. Donna Lutizia was seated near the table's head, her hands clasped, projecting the anxiety of one who senses an approaching storm but cannot predict its direction. Sorrow was beside her, his expression one of habitual boredom, a leather folder before him. Bastiano stood at his usual post by the wall, arms crossed, gaze vigilant, silent. To the left sat 3 family captains whom I knew only by reputation, while Ettore was positioned at the far end, his demeanor smug and primed for conflict. The narrator occupied a liminal space at the threshold, uncertain of her standing, neither dismissed nor formally welcomed. Her presence was a consequence of Raul's summons alone. He made his entrance last, securing the door with the unhurried authority of a man who dictates when the proceedings begin. Dressed in a dark shirt without a jacket, his gaze swept the room before settling momentarily on her. That fleeting connection was enough to restore her composure. What she saw in his eyes was not fear or doubt, but the unyielding quality of cold steel. He did not address her, but the entire assembly. This meeting does not concern territory, the port, or finances, he began, his voice a low resonance that commanded singular attention. This is about the character of our family and the individual who has been systematically corrupting it. Ettore's arms unfolded as his chin lifted, his expression one of absolute certainty that he was about to witness the narrator's public downfall. He presumed Raul was severing ties, that his mother's influence had prevailed, that the fraternal bond would trump all else. He was profoundly mistaken. Over the last 1.5 years, Raul continued, his tone perfectly modulated, Ettore Montecarlo has accrued debts under this family's name without authorization. He has utilized our port for clandestine dealings that circumvented this council. He siphoned revenue from 3 separate operations before Sorrow saw a single dime, and he has tarnished this family's name with his personal affairs. The room fell into an absolute void of sound. The captains, previously stone-like, were suddenly alert and upright. Donna Lucizia's mouth fell open, then snapped shut. Sorrow opened a file and distributed a set of documents, and based on the captains' faces, they substantiated every one of Raul's claims, and more. Ettore became visibly pale. That is a falsehood, he uttered, his voice thin and weak. This is a targeted persecution. Your motive is solely because of her. Raul remained impassive. The evidence is on the table. The figures are there. The dates are there. Your signatures are there. If you wish to contend, contend with the facts, not with me. Sorrow gave a minuscule nod and gesture that carried the finality of a judge's gavel. The captains examined the pages. their expression shifting from neutrality to undisguised disgust. Donna Lutzizia finally rose to her feet. "Raul," she began, her voice brittle and unnatural, "he is your brother." Raul met his mother's gaze directly. His expression was not cruel, but it offered no comfort. It was the face of a man whose verdict was immutable. "You protect the son whom you love," he said. "I protect the family I am sworn to command. The two are not the same." The words struck Donna Lucizia with the force of an unexpected blow. Her mouth opened, but no retort came. She sank back into her chair, crushed into a state of silence. And that quiet from a woman never quiet was the most condemning evidence of all. Ettere's head swiveled, desperately scanning for a sympathetic face, any potential ally within the fortress of loyalty Raul had constructed. He discovered none. The captains averted their eyes. Sorrow was already gathering his materials, as if the matter was concluded. Bastiano, once a statue, shifted his mass, becoming a human barricade between Ettore and the exit. He foresaw the next move, an attempt to flee. "You are exiled," Raul declared, the words landing with judicial weight. "From Palermo, from this family, from all Monte Carlo concerns. As of this instant, you are no longer my responsibility." Ettore shot to his feet, his chair screeching on the stone, fists clenched, directing a look of timeless hatred at Raul. Then his eyes moved slowly to me. I was positioned in the corner, my back to the wall in an effort to be inconspicuous. But when Ettere's volatile gaze locked with mine, I did not flinch. I met it with the same dispassionate calm I had shown on the terrace 3 days before, when he had attempted to sacrifice me. "This is not concluded," he seethed, his eyes fixed upon me. His voice was low, an attempt at control, but it carried a vibration that resonated deep within me. This was more than rage. This was a blood promise, the kind a man like Ettore makes when he has nothing left to lose and requires a purpose to endure. He departed without a backward glance. Bastiano stepped aside, and the door clicked shut, the sound echoing against stone. The room began to clear. First the captains left, silent and burdened by the weight of what had transpired. Sorrow collected his belongings, gave Raul a brief nod, and exited with the unhurried air of a man for whom time is an ally. Donna Lutzizia was the last to depart. She pushed herself to her feet, gave her son an unreadable glance, and then was gone. Bastiano followed her out, closing the door once more. Then it was only us. Raul stood at the head of the table, hands planted on the wood, his shoulders slumped slightly as if the true cost of his victory was just now settling in. I pushed myself from the wall and began to walk toward him, each step amplified in the silent chamber. "Did you orchestrate all this for me?" I asked, halting across the table from him. He looked up, his eyes fatigued but still possessing their signature intensity, now layered with something else, something vulnerable, fragile, even human. "I did it because it was necessary," he said, "but I would not have done it today if not for you." The stark honesty of that statement breached my defenses in a way no physical intimacy ever could. That was the core of Rello Montecarvo, a man who speaks the truth when it is most costly, refusing to medicate reality to make it more palatable. I moved around the table's edge. I stopped directly before him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, to inhale that mixture of aged wood and coffee that was his essence. I raised a hand and touched his face, tracing his defined jawline, the heat of his skin, the faint abrasion of stubble. He closed his eyes, and in that single action, Rello Montecarvo closing his eyes to my touch, as if for once accepting comfort without condition. I understood this to be the most unguarded he had ever been with anyone. More real than the night in his study, more authentic than any verbal confession he could ever make. His eyes remained closed, a quiet surrender to my gesture in that silent, history-filled room. Later, we went to the garden, settling on the same stone bench where our relationship had first become complicated. The night was exquisite, the lights of Palermo glittering below like a spill of diamonds. The air was fragrant with orange blossoms in the sea, and a ship's horn sounded from the port. Raoul was beside me, silent, but it was not the strained quiet of the past 2 days. This was the placid stillness between two people who have finally ceased resisting an emotional inevitability and have allowed it to be. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and he remained motionless. He did not embrace me or draw me closer or speak. He was simply present, as solid as the villa's old stone, like the deep roots of the orange trees, like something designed for permanence. I closed my eyes and breathed, feeling his shoulder against me and the warm Sicilian air. We were together. We had found a moment of peace. The conflicts were resolved. Ettore was gone. The family was aware of the truth. And I had discovered something genuine in a world I had entered only seeking vengeance. But as the wind shifted, carrying a chill from the water, Ettore's final words returned. Not as a sound, but as a heavy premonition. He had uttered only 4 words. His eyes locked on mine before he left, with the composure of a man who has no need to raise his voice to be terrifying. This is not over. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I was inclined to believe him. This concludes Volume 1, but the second is already written. You can access it now for a nominal fee. Just 3 months of tranquility. That was all I had wanted. Raoul at my side. Ettore removed. The villa was finally still until a late-night call shattered the silence. On the line, my sister's voice, the one person I cherish most in this world, sobbing with a desperation I had never heard. And before I could respond, a man's voice intervened, cold, detached, and terrifyingly familiar. You know what I require, Hortensia, and you understand the consequences should I be denied. He did not return in a fit of rage. He returned with a calculated strategy, Russian allies, and my sister as leverage. The price for her safe return was the one vow I swore I would never break. To return to him and betray Raoul. As you have heard, this is but a glimpse of Volume 2. To experience the full, uncensored narrative, simply click the first link in the pinned comment. I will see you there in a few moments. As a quick reminder, clicking that first link in the comments will provide you the whole of Book 2, ad-free. It is that simple. I am thoroughly enjoying the process of creating Book 2. And since you are all embracing it, I can promise the narrative only grows darker from this point. This is where we delve into stories with far greater consequence. True, dark romance. And because this version is becoming so much more intense, the video would be censored here on this platform. This private space is where I can truly be unrestrained and create my best work for all of you. Remember, the channel was demonetized. So this is how I maintain my team and continue to produce high-quality stories for you. I have more news to announce soon. I will be waiting for you at that first link in the pinned comment. Unfortunately, many individuals have been pirating our audio, effectively stealing the entire story and simply re-uploading it to this platform.
The night Palermo breathed salt into the hills and the villa lights trembled against the old stone, Hortensia stood at the edge of a life she no longer recognized. The betrayal had not shattered with noise, it had shattered quietly like fine glass pressed under a velvet glove. That was the strange dignity of her grief. It did not beg to be seen, it only changed the temperature of everything around her. In another story, she would have run. She would have packed her dresses, boarded the first train south, and let distance perform the surgery her heart could not. But tragedy rarely asks a person to leave. It asks a person to stay and see what remains when illusion burns away. So she stayed. She stood in dining rooms heavy with old money, in corridors haunted by portraits, in gardens where orange blossoms tried in vain to sweeten the smell of power. And in those spaces she encountered not only danger, but recognition. Rel was not beautiful in the soft way betrayal often is. He was carved by responsibility, sharpened by silence, darkened by decisions made too young. He seemed at first like the perfect instrument of revenge, yet the closer she came, the more he ceased to be an instrument and became a mirror. In him she saw the cost of living without choice. In her he saw the cost of surviving without tenderness. That is why the story aches. Two people reached for each other from opposite sides of captivity. She had been reduced by love that did not honor her. He had been elevated by power that did not know him. Their meeting did not erase the darkness around them. It simply illuminated a human truth within it. Even in a brutal world, the heart still searches for the one place where it does not have to perform. And that is the life lesson. A person does not always find herself in safety. Sometimes she finds herself in contrast. In the wrong room, with the wrong people, after the wrong man breaks her, she suddenly hears the sound of her own soul returning. Not because life became gentle, but because pain stripped away pretense. What remained was not innocence, it was clarity, and clarity, though born in sorrow, can be its own kind of salvation.